Brigadoon Radio with our good friend Gerald Ashley. Oh my God, am I having a stroke? Gerald, how are you? What's happening? Where are we finding you today?
I'm fine, and I still remember my name, so don't worry if you can't.
Do you know who you are? Do I know who I am? I don't know.
Well, exactly. Does it matter even? I'm fine. This is the last boring update on my surgery. I'm all cleared by the surgeon, and I'm ready to take up ballroom dancing at some stage. But I probably won't.
I love it.
No, I probably won't. But no, so I'm in good shape, and we've been a little bit intermittent in the summer and into the autumn, but now we're back sort of full throttle, and we need a 5-hour show because there's so much going on, isn't there?
5-hour show. What are you channeling Castro? I mean, I don't do anything for 5 hours.
Well, there's so many topics, and as usual, I'll let you kick off the topics. But we've got a huge range of things on the go at the moment.
Well, let's see. Yeah, maybe we'll. I'm not sure we'll hit 5 hours, but maybe we'll eclipse an hour today. So let's see how we do. First off, inflation, your favorite topic.
Yeah.
Is this one of your favorite topics? Inflation, not the act of it, but just the talk of it.
Well, I mean, you know the old joke: you ask 3 economists and you get 4 opinions, and of course we're getting lots of different opinions about inflation. I personally think that we're making a mistake if we think it's like the 1970s. A lot of people are sort of turning around and saying, there've been various shocks in the global economy, and inflation has got embedded because governments have printed money like water, and that it will persist for very many years. I mean, you could say in the 70s it persisted right into the 1980s. So
you're saying we shouldn't think it's the 70s in the sense like, oh, we've been there, done that, we know how to handle it?
No, I think it's just a slightly different beast. I don't think it's going to have the longevity of 10 years. We might still be talking about it in a year's time or 18 months, but that might be pretty much it.
Do you think it's getting too much attention maybe currently?
Yeah, but of course it's front and center because it's hitting people's wages and all the rest of it. There are lots of spillovers coming here, and maybe the first thing to say is that this might actually be a natural occurrence after letting the brakes off from the global lockdown, that we suddenly let the brakes off everything, and whilst we were locked down, governments were printing money to try and keep everything afloat and save businesses and everything.
Right.
Now that money kind of went to all sorts of crazy things, NFT markets, where in the art market people were paying literally millions of dollars for something that all I could see was a water printed copy of something. I mean, it was completely mad, completely mad. So we've had all of that, and now of course it's hit mainstream life. But I do wonder if it's a one-off shock, because if you look at the commodity markets, with the possible exception of oil, though oil has come off quite a lot as well, but the commodity markets are definitely down. And shipping rates, we talked about the global supply chains, and shipping costs were through the roof. They're right back where they started from. So it's been a gigantic inverted letter V. So that one-off price shock might work its way out of the system relatively quickly. But there's a lot of pain between now and getting to that point, I think.
Yeah, you're spot on about the shipping rates. I'll have to dig out this stat, but I think they're down maybe 90% from where they were. Yeah. I mean, it's just it's just shocking how it's just basically, you're right, it's done like a 360 or 180 back to where it started. Inflation is interesting in 2 things. It matters to you if you're buying stuff. So I saw like the Ford F-150 Lightning, the Ford EV pickup. Yeah, they've increased it by 30%, and that all has to do with supply chain problems, chips supposedly, and commodities, food. As you mentioned, there's definitely been inflation in that space. But the energy, kind of petrol, gasoline here in the States, is back to where it was. And also, it's a campaign season here in the U.S. And the Republicans, their main objective was to tar and feather the Democrats with the inflation tag. And I sometimes think that when a lot of people start talking about stuff, it becomes like conventional wisdom, and it seems to be a bigger problem than maybe it really is.
I think you're right, but there is a risk in all of this, which is the timing of central bank actions, for whatever reason, has been woeful. They've been very slow to raise rates. It's always very easy to look back and say what you would have done if you were running things, but they were certainly, the Fed, the ECB, Bank of England, all very slow to raise interest rates. In fact, the Fed have been better than certainly the ECB or the Bank of England. Yeah. Now, I fear that the central banks will keep raising rates at the very point when they should stop raising them. And so that they will have been too slow on the way in, and they'll be too slow on the way out. And so I think there's a risk that central banks tighten too often at the very point all the things we're talking about start to slow down. And there are some pinch points already. We're not seeing it in unemployment data yet because unemployment lags everything else. But one that catches my eye, and it's in your part of the world, is the US domestic residential property market, the mortgage market, is taking a hit. And we're about to take a hit in the UK as well. And
yeah, I think we're at a is it a 6-year high? Maybe it's a 6-year high, but it's over 7%, which seems quite alarming when you could borrow money just a year ago, probably for half that price, if not less.
Yeah.
The impact on that, is definitely getting a lot of attention. I think in the US, there's definitely a shortage of houses, right? Yeah. So are people still going to buy? Probably, but are they going to move or move up? I think that may be what's interesting. And once again, there's certain neighborhoods that are always going to be kind of desirable. And if you want to get into that neighborhood, are you going to sweat 1 or 2 inflation points? I don't know. But if it's a starter home, or like I said, downsizing or moving to a different property, I don't know. Maybe there will be a stall. And real estate is wildly important in the U.S. There's no doubt about it in terms of velocity of money and just consumer well-being, or just the perception that my life is going well because I'm moving property.
Yeah, no, I think it's the same in the UK. We don't have that continental culture of renting. Any friends of ours in Germany would think we're mad. Why do you buy a property? You just always rent one. But they have a kind of very different sort of almost fixed rental market system. So it's not not a free market, and so people can rent long term and not be exposed. Now, all of this means is that inflation, prices are going up. People are price sensitive. If interest rates keep going up or stay up, I think there's going to be trouble in 2 areas. There's going to be trouble in the mortgage market, or in people borrowing for property, and also in discretionary spending. Because some people say, well, okay, I've got to pay the mortgage, so I'm not taking that second holiday. We're not having the anniversary weekend away at a flash hotel in Scotland or France or wherever. So I think a lot of spending at the margin might really suffer. And in the very sector that has been absolutely crucified by the lockdown. So I think we don't give investment advice, but if you look at things like the hospitality sector and hotels and lodging and all the rest of it, and airlines, you've got to be very nervous of all those sectors. And so trouble ahead there, I think.
And I think the auto industry, if Ford can suddenly jack up the price of an F-150 EV truck by 30%, plus you got to borrow more money, it's going to cost you more money to borrow to pay off this truck. Are you going to see less people buying cars? I think you're spot on. Discretionary income or decisions, restaurants, entertainment, spending a few $100 extra bucks on a car.
Yeah,
I think there's going to be some challenges there in the new year.
There's a behavioral thing here. There's a sort of human behavioral thing. I don't think people, not normal people, go around calculating interest rates at the top of their heads and wondering about, oh my God, Fed funds have gone up 50 basis points. They have a metric in their mind, is what is the monthly payment?
Right.
If their monthly payment is $300 for the car and $1,000 on the mortgage, fair enough. If suddenly the car's $600 and the mortgage is $1,500, something's got to give. And so I think it's difficult to always know where these price points are, but that's where the discretionary change in spending will come when people say, wow, look at the monthly payments.
Now, I love the analysis of behavior. I mean, I think it's just such a telling data point. It's, are people planning trips? Are they upgrading their washer and dryer? I mean, stuff you take, you don't think about, but you're like, I've got this wash machine's great. Do I need another one? I don't know. Because I'm spending, $300-400 more bucks just to live and drive. Those are kind of interesting numbers that aren't sexy, but I think behavior is really where we're going to learn what's happening in the economy.
And it's a big challenge for manufacturers and for service providers, because the iron rule is don't be caught in the middle. Funnily enough, the very high-end products will still sell well. So
100%,
So if you get the really high branded fridge, washing machine, Bentley car, whatever, Ferrari, they will always sell. And the very, very bottom end, where it's pilot high, sell it cheap, get it out the door on generic goods will sell. Anybody stuck in the middle will be absolutely shellacked. And that's exactly what's happened before in inflationary times. So you don't want to be a middle of the road producer or service provider where you're somewhere in the middle in terms of pricing, because the only way you're going to survive is probably to go down market, and there'll be plenty of people who will be there before you. So this is all very cheerful, but these are some of the things that could happen.
There's a great quote from I think it's Jim Hightower down there in Texas, and he used to say that there's only two things in the middle of the road: dead armadillos and bad decisions.
Oh, I really like that. I like that. That's very good indeed. So we are bearish or pessimistic.
Well,
inflation.
I think it depends where you are on the economic ladder. I think looking at hospitality is to me is an interesting thing, and I love the white goods, what people are buying. I do think like if you want a house in the States, I don't know. I think you press on. I think then you don't take the trip. Then you don't go to the meal and. But I don't know. If you want an F-150, it seems like you're pretty committed to getting an F-150, even if it's going to cost you a few hundred more extra bucks a month.
Yeah, it's the elasticity of the demand, isn't it? And I think there are some goods that people will just pay bonkers prices for. The market that I have absolutely no understanding of at all, well, you'll be relieved to hear it, really, is the ladies' handbag market. I mean, where people are paying $25,000 for a handbag. I mean,
you should be.
I'm in the wrong career. I should have gone into handbags.
No, we should all work for Hermes, man. I mean, the Birkin.
So
you should meet my wife. I'm happy to introduce you to my wife and some of her friends. I think they can explain to you the rationale behind handbags. What an industry.
Yeah, there's always a high end, and that will always survive. But a lot of other businesses will get driven down to being commoditized. And that is not the way to be successful in business normally.
There's actually an interesting stat out of this week about how Gen Z is actually drinking less alcohol. And one of the reasons was health. But one of the bigger reasons was just the cost,
Right.
They're doing the calculation, the delta, the pleasure is great, but the extra cost, it's not, like they're saying it's not worth the extra money, which is pretty
Well, I think they're missing a trick here. They're not drinking enough, because once you drunk a large amount, you've forgotten what the cost was anyhow.
High, low, exactly. But once again, you never want to be in the middle of the road.
Exactly. The middle is a hell of a place to be. You've got to avoid it.
Well, let's, speaking of the middle of the road in Texas, how about energy? Quite an interesting headlines coming out of the UK about the dire winter. There's a run, I guess, on electric blankets. Our good friend Macron is wearing a turtleneck in France to encourage the French.
He can always be relied upon to dress for the occasion. You will remember about 6 weeks ago he was in a sort of mock battle dress whilst talking to Zelensky in Ukraine on the phone from the Elysee.
Macron could do no wrong for me, man. Whatever he's wearing, we should. There's a new measurement there, a new index. The Macron fashion index.
This is the big ideological divide in this podcast. I think there's less to him than meets the eye. But there we are.
By the way, That could be true, but he's still, a great president. Anyways, I just learned, this is an aside, that Paris is almost 100, 120, maybe 110 miles closer to London than Edinburgh.
Well, yeah, and your point is,
well, I was like, no wonder Scotland has got so many problems. Anyways,
well, I mean,
there's no love. I think there, but also I was also geographically and economically, I was thinking, between Paris, London, Amsterdam. I mean, that is like an economic powerhouse. I mean,
yeah, it's been a triangle of commerce really since the Middle Ages, and in fact, finesse it slightly and say before Amsterdam it was Antwerp, but basically. Yeah, you're absolutely right, and there's a persistence in these economic cluster areas, and you see that in other parts of the world as well. But it's very, very much the case in Europe. But of course, the manufacturing clusters are slightly differently.
And it's hard for you to escape the draw of Paris. That's the logical conclusion.
Well, I suppose if you can't afford to be in London, you have to go to Paris.
Anyways, let's talk about energy. I don't know, a lot more hype. OPEC this week, OPEC Plus decided to drop 2 million barrels a day. I dig a stat out. The world produces like 90 million barrels a day. So we're dropping 2 off. A lot of angst out of the White House, obviously, especially coming up in an election. I don't know. Is energy still a big problem?
Well, we keep using it. We keep burning it. We're burning more coal than we ever have. In the UK, that made a big thing of saying we're not using coal anymore last year. We're back to using it about 2 or 3% of the time for electricity generation. As ever, I think it'd be interesting to hear your view on this, because away from just the market price of oil, what's really going on in the calculations here? Because OPEC and Saudis and the sort of big oil producers, they can kind of turn the tap on and off at will. And for some reason, they've decided that they want to jack the price up a bit. How far? Who knows? Do we go back to $100 a barrel? Maybe, I don't know.
I was surprised by. I mean,
it's the policy. 2 million. Maybe it's the politics rather than the market is the thing.
Yeah, I think you're spot on. I think the headlines, like just kind of sticking it to Biden. I mean, even the New York Times was quite critical of, the fist bump diplomacy. Saudi is not a very popular country here in the U.S. for a number of reasons, especially with the media elite. But is 2 million barrels a big number? I don't know. I was just.
Well, it's at the margin, isn't it? It's like all these things. You only need to do a bit at the margin to sort of tip the scales. The other one, which of course, again, I think we talked about maybe in our very first podcast back in January, February time, was the LNG market, the liquid natural gas market, and how we half guessed that Mr. Putin might, turn off the gas taps. And who is going to be the big winner in this actually is the United States, because along with the Middle East, because the US have got a lot of LNG to export. And I see the German president has been complaining that he feels that American producers of LNG have been sort of, guilty of scamming on, or scalping, isn't it? Scalping on prices. But the fact of the matter is there are big imbalances in individual economies as to where they're going to get their energy from. And,
well, as a proud American, I can say that all my fellow citizens are strictly capitalist, and they believe fully in the free market. What's interesting is we're just talking about the margins. We're talking about like short-term stuff, but I think we both would agree nobody's talking about the big issue. Why are we building nuclear plants? Like, why are we worried about these like short-term fixes? There's general consensus on how we can create energy with low carbon, and it's nuclear. Why are we building these plants?
Yeah, it beggars belief as far as I'm concerned. And Finland, after a large number of delays and years behind, have now got their major nuclear power plant up and running. I think it was 2 or 3 weeks ago, and it's already a significant part of the calculation for Europe, the European grid for electricity. The Germans, I just don't understand the mindset at all about Germany and nuclear power. And Britain, I'm slightly worried that yet again, we're going to get a lot of showboating by politicians. There's a surprise. There was Boris, remember him? Boris talked a lot about small modular reactors, which would be a really good idea. And, we put modular reactors into aircraft carriers and submarines. Why the hell can't we have localized nuclear plants? That, to me, nobody's talking much about it, because now the geniuses in the Ministry of Energy have dreamt up some wacko plan that we're going to have nuclear fusion in 2040. No, we won't. No, we won't. They don't know how to do it. They keep, nuclear fusion has been around since I was in short trousers, and it's always 20 years away. Well, a slight bit of maths suggests now it's only 18 years away. And I think, I don't know why it is that policymakers, lawmakers, etc., cannot focus on doable long-term projects. This running around in high-vis jackets for photo opportunities, something I know you think's important to have the right photo opportunity. They don't lead anywhere. We, as you say, we actually need proper, secure power sources, and a lot of the Western world doesn't have it.
And just say, listen, this is what we're doing. These are 3 things we're focused on. One of them is nuclear power.
Yeah,
we get these things up and running. Yeah, it's pretty wild to watch this. Okay, speaking of politicians without conviction or making U-turns, can we talk about our friend Team Truss?
Right. Well, here we go.
Can I just say, I thought when she got the job, there was a high probability. I was like, when is her first vote of no confidence? 2022, 2023, 2024? Oh my God, could you ask for a more disastrous entry into number 10?
I think you've got a little overexcitable, and you're already, penciling in the return of King Boris, which, as I've explained before, is not going to happen. But boy, it's been an interesting 2 or 3 weeks. Funnily enough, in terms of Mrs. Truss, I quite like the message, but the messenger has been awful, and the way it's been presented has been awful. And the most extraordinary thing is they only essentially presented one half of what's going to happen, and they actually did a Boris, in my opinion, in that they announced all the things that would keep people happy and would be crowd pleasers, like tax cuts, except they fell over the ball on the political issue of the high rate. And they made no mention at all of spending cuts or changes in revenue projections. And of course, the markets, unsurprisingly, had a fit. And, that's where we are.
Yeah, I think you're spot on about the comms. What struck me is the speech she gave to the Conservative Party conference was, to me, the speech she should have gave when she took over number 10. I mean, I think there was a general surprise of maybe her economic policies, which I think caught the market off guard. Yeah. There's no doubt that the UK needs to find out some kind of growth pattern, right? So I think her instincts around that are spot on, and it should be a combination of things, including tax cuts. But it was never messaged. It was never communicated. And I think it's a classic example, too, of politicians, when they win an election, they think the job is done. Yeah. But in fact, after you win the election, your job is your campaigning is only just beginning. In fact, you need to campaign more. And it was striking to me when after the Queen's funeral, it was the UN General Assembly, and Truss was in New York. And I'm very visual, and I do think it's important. She met with Macron, and we could dig at the photo. It looked like a regional sales office. I mean, there was no grandeur. It was, and then I think she did an interview with Sky News in this kind of dingy, dark, unglamorous hotel room. And I'm just like, you're the prime minister of one of the most important countries in the world, and I think these kind of things add up. And
I agree.
It's all part of the messaging.
I agree. And I think there's no way of getting away from the fact she is a titanically awful public speaker. I mean, she is beyond wooden. I mean, I think I would rather listen to somebody reading out the Manchester phone directory than actually. I mean,
but even bad, I think there's a way to get around that. You can just say, listen, I'm not the greatest orator, but here's what I believe. These are 3 things we're going to work on. Let's get to work. And I think people would respond to that.
I'm slightly surprised you haven't packed your bags and you're off to 10 Downing Street to kind of, iron out some of this stuff, because I thought
I'm ready.
You'd be the man to do it. And it's such a cheap time to come with the exchange rate.
I know.
So make sure you get paid in dollars and not in sterling, Marc.
I love it. But I do think it's worthy debate. I think, and there's lessons to be learned here it's almost like a product launch kind of situation. I mean, I think there's business leaders that can see what Team Truss did, where they failed. And it's just a good reminder. I mean, you got to communicate. It sounds crazy, but you got to be always communicating, and keep it simple. These are 3 things we're focused on, and make it happen.
We're back to your mantra that, you have to stick to the possible, not necessarily, it's not aspirational. And some of the things are a bit aspirational. And 1 or 2 of the things were actually never going to be understood by the general public. Actually, the general public, and maybe I'm being a bit rude about them, but they will not understand that cutting the higher rate of tax is quite likely to generate higher levels of tax revenue. This is just completely lost on people.
Well, I agree. Going back to our initial conversation, if discretionary income impacts markets, that is, if people have more money or less money to buy trips, cars, why wouldn't changing the tax rate work? And I think, once again, this idea of trickle down, if you let other people define the narrative, you lose, and that's why the communication aspect of it is so important.
Yeah, I think it's right. And the irony of all of this is, she, like it or hate it, she represents a radical change, but that's got lost. It's just, and I think this is your field and not mine. I think, is it terminal in the sense, I think she could well be Prime Minister of the next general election, but I struggle to see the Tories winning, to be honest, and that's astonishing given the size of the majority. I mean, it's quite astonishing, the idea that the Labour Party could be the next administration. I mean, we may end up in some dreadful muddle of minority governments and all the rest of it again, because Labour, it's such a mountain to climb. They can't quite make that final push to the summit to an absolute majority. Then, of course, all sorts of other fun and games start.
Well, they've been in power for 12 years. I think this is the 5th prime minister, right, during that period. I don't know. It's tough to keep things going. There's a bit of inertia. There's not a lot of agreement. It could be a natural cyclical thing. But you're spot on. The majority is massive. And there's polling numbers saying that Labor is up by 30 points, which is absolutely bad. I mean, it's almost mathematically impossible,
Yeah, exactly. I mean, if it's a trading market, you'd sell into that, I think. But I think maybe there's a more nuanced view, and you say, well, there's the Tories have been in for what we're talking about, 12 years. But in a way, some of those governments have been very, very different. I mean, it's hard to believe that Mrs. May's cabinet is even on speaking terms with some of Mrs. Truss's cabinet. I mean, they are from completely different planets, and so you may take a view, for historical view, is that the Tory party, this fantastic winning machine, is it going to break? Because there are a lot of those 2 wings are very far apart. Now, we would have said that 2 years ago about Labour, and the moderates have won. But at the moment, the Tory party looks like 2 parties to me, to be honest.
Oh, it's 100%, if not 3. I mean, I think even here in the States, we have 4 parties operating in the 2-party system, right?
Right.
I think the parliamentary system obviously lends itself to having more independent, multiple parties. What's interesting to me, getting back almost to Moscow, right? I mean, Truss's biggest opponents are in the room. The phone call is coming from inside the house. Yeah. It's a lesson to, you can do a lot of stuff externally, but if you haven't got your internal team on the same page, it's a real challenge.
She doesn't strike me as a backroom deal maker. She's not an LBJ or one of these guys who can talk people.
Well, nobody's an LBJ.
Well,
LBJ was an alien, man.
He's quite an extraordinary character. Again, love him or hate him.
Do you know the story? Do you know the Jack Valenti story where Jack Valenti was shorter, and I think do you know the story? So that Lyndon Johnson had a pool, right? And Johnson's over 6 feet, Valenti's 5. And Johnson just kept going deeper and deeper into the deep end, right? To the point where Valenti had to tread water to maintain the conversation. There was all these psychological games, and the chairs apparently in the Oval in the cabinet room were cut lower for the cabinet.
We're getting close to Mr. Putin's long table here, which we don't see at the moment. We don't see that anymore.
Maybe he needs to bring back the long table. Yeah. All right. So wrapping up on Truss, I mean, what do we think she survives? She goes to the general election. If you had to make a prediction today.
Yeah, I doubt that she would get a majority. I think we may have a mess in 2024.
But you think she's the top of the ticket? She leads the Conservative Party into the general election.
I think so, because despite your adoration of Boris, I don't think there's a route. I don't think there's a route back for him. Because if we had a presidential system, he'd be absolutely in the number one driving slot. But we don't. I mean,
what about Keir Starmer? Is he going to be leading the Labour Party?
Probably, but they're not a very inspiring crew. I mean, here's another sort of quiz question: can you name 3 people from the Labour front bench? I mean, it's a bit of a struggle, isn't it?
The Labour front bench. That's you've
got 40 to choose from, and you're struggling on 3. In fact, I'm struggling a bit now.
Was Jeremy Corbyn around?
Well, he's not even in the party anymore. But so all of this it's going to be noisy and messy, and as we know, markets don't like that. And to try and stabilize things, I know people focus a lot on the exchange rate, which I think is pretty much irrelevant. There's a lot of that. It's really to do with the dollar, but the cost of borrowing is important. And if Britain is a big borrower in capital markets, and we, in the famous phrase, are reliant on the kindness of strangers in buying our bonds. And if the strangers get less kind, then you've got real trouble.
I think too, she's suffering from, I was looking for inflection points, off ramps. How can she change the story, the narrative? I don't know. Maybe she's got to wait till the coronation of King Charles III in June, but that seems like a long time to be treading water. Let's go back to Moscow.
Okay.
Psyops. Let's talk about the psychology, the psyops that is happening here in the U.S. last night. Joe Biden in a fundraiser, which I think was hosted by James Murdoch, which is pretty interesting, in New York, told these highfalutin, wealthy Democratic donors that Putin should be taken seriously and that Armageddon is around the corner. Unbelievable. We have Putin. Is he the new rocket man?
Oh, right. Well, I see the Rocket Man's been very active. Again, he's
very busy.
He's disappointed us this year because he's normally very active in August.
And he's been quite busy these last few weeks. Even one night sending 2 rockets over Japan.
I know we slightly demean him, but he is a serious trouble, though. I've always worked on the basis that President Xi in China would always tap him on the shoulder if things got really serious. But
what I love is the Rocket Man's rockets always seem to go towards Japan, never towards China. It's quite interesting.
Funny that. It may be the prevailing wind. Who knows?
Probably, yeah. But I'm not a scientist, so maybe you're right.
I don't think the wind knows what it should do with it. But the serious point about what's going on in Russia and this war with Ukraine I think it's very interesting. And I was thinking the other day, just imagine we were reporting on the First World War. We all have a mental image of the First World War where both sides are stuck in trenches and never moved. That's not strictly true. The front lines moved 30, 40 miles this way, then that way. And in fact, the Germans had a very major advance in 1918, and then they exhausted themselves, and it was a counterpunch from the Allies that did for them. They overextended themselves. So in the same way, we've got this idea now that Ukraine, everybody thought it was going to be a blitzkrieg, quick war all over in a fortnight. That didn't happen. And it looks like trench warfare. I would caution against people thinking because the Ukrainians have advanced X number of miles, that they are, quote, winning. They clearly have stalled what is a very rickety and inefficient Russian military machine. But I would hesitate to say that the Russians are anywhere near defeated. I mean, there are no Ukrainian advances into Crimea. Now, what you may find is what happens in situations like this. Putin's done the first thing. He starts taking personal control. The second one is you fire all the generals you don't like. Well, I think quite a few are probably missing from the TV screens and have been, shuffled off to dachas somewhere in the middle of nowhere, if they're lucky. And then the third thing is you say, you do this sort of thing, or you draw a line in the sand, you say, right, this must go no further. And I suppose this is where Joe Biden's idea comes in. We push, if we corner Putin, he'll do something reckless and he'll fire, battlefield nuclear weapons. My personal view is, and I have no idea, but my personal view is that won't happen, but that he may well use chemical weapons. And then I think NATO has got a real problem, because NATO and really the United States under Obama didn't react. Obama said there was going to be a red line on chemical weapons in Syria. Yeah. It happened, and then there was no reaction. Now, I think if there was a nuclear attack, I think there would be a hell of a reaction. But if it's a chemical one, it's kind of one of those sly chess moves that pushes your opponent, and it's, will they really react? I mean, what is the American reaction to, chemical warfare in eastern Ukraine?
No, it's spot on. And what's proportional? I mean, do you respond with conventional weapons to destroy the delivery system? It's interesting also today, while Biden is talking about Armageddon, the Washington Post has a story that U.S. intelligence gathered intel that Putin was talked back at one of his recent meetings. That is, one of his inner circles talked back to him. Oh, right. Somehow this intel got into the president's daily brief, right? And somehow it got to the Washington Post. I'm just saying, it's pretty bizarre how this stuff happens. The psyops of this war is being fought on so many different levels and so many different platforms. There is this narrative that he's crazy, he's out of control. We should also say, by the way, it's Putin's birthday today. He turns 70.
Yeah, he's 70 today, isn't he?
I don't know if you sent him anything. But the messaging it's all over the place, and it seems very intentional. Right, this victory, where are these great liberation? Are we seeing great footage from the battlefield? I don't know. This seems like the most bizarre war, and maybe because so much of my vision of war has been warped culturally just by watching so many World War II videos. Yeah. I think you're spot on. This is more akin to old school World War I, maybe even 19th century warfare.
Yeah, it feels messy, and it's clearly not short now, because it's since the middle of February. So what are we now, 8 months into this? You get the feeling this could still be going on in 1, 2, 3 years' time. The other. Well, it's been going on. What's interesting is it's been going on since 2014. I mean, the Crimea invasion was 2014. Yeah.
So some generals in Ukraine will say, well, no, this is almost going on a decade.
Yeah, that's a good point. And then for people who like conspiracies and dramas, which I know you always love, Marc, I think I've mentioned before, we both mentioned before, in many ways that Putin is a bit like Julius Caesar. He's all powerful in his world, but he is terrified of the 30 people who surround him, which may be this point about whether or not somebody genuinely is pushing back against him.
Yeah,
why? We got to caution on this, because you think, great, we've got rid of him, but he's not going to be taken over by a nice, easygoing, Western liberal, democratic type leader. We could well get another equally, if not worse, nasty piece of work. So there's no easy.
Now, come on, we're gonna have an LSE, London School of Economics educated, USC, University of South Carolina graduate.
Now, here's one for you. There's a hint in the name. Isn't this Boris's big opportunity? Yeah, I mean, he on the world stage. There you go.
Exactly.
That would be so.
What does happen next? And let me add, if any kind of serious weapon is detonated. It blows up it'll be on Twitter within seconds.
Yeah.
Right. What happens? Does NATO respond within seconds?
I think
is it 24 hours? Is it a week?
No,
is there a UN Security Council meeting? Like, what happened?
I agree. If you're sitting in the hot seat as President of the United States, particularly if it's a chemical weapons attack, I think it's quite difficult to know what the correct level of response is. If it's a ridiculously, over the top attack, I don't know, say on one of the Balkan states, not the Balkan states, the Baltic states, or a serious tactical nuclear weapon inside Ukraine. Funnily enough, it's kind of easier because
I think you agree. And it's a chemical weapon is quite insidious because it would be easier to execute. Whereas my understanding of a nuclear weapon on the Russian side, there would be days of prep. You just the weapons they're talking about would require some kind of movement, putting material into place, which ideally could be tracked on spy satellites. Whereas a chemical weapon, it seems to me, you could deliver that in multiple different ways.
There's another tactic which I think we started to see this week, is with this pushback by Ukrainian troops making advances, the Russians have gone to targeting cities with missiles. And one of the not hidden, but stories that maybe isn't talked so much about is there's been quite a return of Ukrainians to the Ukraine from the initial days of the war. Now, if those people, are sitting in large cities or major towns start being bombed by missiles, we will have another refugee crisis. And so if there isn't enough trouble in Western Europe already with energy and the coming winter, if you were to add on a refugee crisis to that, you really have had problems. And to be deeply cynical and unpleasant, if one was Putin, that may be quite a smart lever to pull. I mean, it's obviously dreadful, but from that perspective.
Well, and that's his modus operandi, right? Being dreadful and acting horribly. But I think what's interesting, my understanding too, Ukraine has been very key to get people back into the cities, opening restaurants, opening shops, return to life, the velocity of money, getting that economy going, which is obviously in a dreadful state. So attacking 8 cities, vis-a-vis the economic engine of Ukraine, I don't know, it could be pretty interesting. And I think maybe Putin, can be touting these crazy weapons, but he's like, okay, I didn't use a nuclear weapon, but I'm using more conventional weapons to create chaos. And it just drags this thing out even longer. Either way, it's not a great situation. It's amazing that it's his birthday today. I just think as long as he's around, it's just a problem.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's incredibly serious. We make light of some points about it. I mean, it is very, very serious. And as I say, the correct level of response by the West to anything that happens is critical, actually. I mean, absolutely.
And of course, what our friends in Beijing do, which we should talk, just in passing, we should let our viewers know, since I know you're excited about. The 20th National Congress starts on Sunday. And on the 16th of October, Xi is supposed to take over the paramount leadership, his third term. But I don't know, there'll be a lot of focus on Beijing in the next few weeks. You got to think that Beijing does not want a nuclear detonation.
I think,
as Xi gets his third term.
I think that must be right. Though they must also be very pleased with the situation that Russia is no longer a top table player, really. I mean, is it a vassal state? It's certainly pretty close. Yeah, and I mean, it's got lots of internal divisions within it, and they've always been held together like a large, most very large countries by autocracy. So I think Russia just demonstrates it's quite fragile, it's quite brittle, and it might snap in all sorts of ways. So there we are. That's a nice, cheerful roundup of going around the world, isn't it?
Fantastic. We'll make you a provincial governor of,
Yeah, thank you.
Some far eastern province.
Yeah. Never to be heard of ever again.
You'll be on the Pacific Ocean, though. You'll have Pacific Ocean viewpoint.
I can see why you should be in sales. You're selling.
By the way, are you following the story? Apparently, 2 Russians left across the Bering Strait. They sailed 300 miles and they landed on an island, I guess in extreme western Alaska, seeking refugee status. They don't want to get drafted. Yeah. So they're escaping even to Alaska, which I yet to see a photo of these guys. I mean, I don't know. I'm becoming so crazed. I mean, I'm going down these conspiracy holes, but that is the story out of Alaska. 2 Russians have left across the Bering Sea for freedom in Alaska.
And I get the feeling the Bering Sea is kind of, a nasty piece of water. I imagine it's not.
I don't think it's. I don't think it's like sailing around the Greek islands in the summer.
No, it's not the Serpentine Lake in London.
I don't see a lot of. I've yet to see a cruise being offered around the Bering Sea, but so that's an interesting development. Okay, with something enjoyable. What are we? I don't have my famous cards. What are we reading and watching?
Okay.
Gerald, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I'll do watching first of all.
Okay.
I don't know if we'll put a graphic up for it. And it's been out a little while on Netflix. I watched a documentary about the German IT and payments company called Wirecard. And this has turned out to be a massive fraud. And it's a really good inside documentary on how the...
I want to watch that. It's a good film then.
Yeah, investigative journalists in the Financial Times sort of smelled a rat. They kind of added up all the internal numbers, and they got some serious accountancy types in to look at the numbers. And it was very clear that even from the published documentation, things weren't quite right. Well, the actual horror story unfolded involving shadow companies that have operated in all parts of the world where people have turned up and given uneducated local people a lump of money and saying, "Can we use your postal address?" I mean, so it's the same old story with fraud. There's always false accounting, and of course, there's false accounting in a big way. And there's normally a lot of borrowing or leverage going on as well. And it's a great story because it also feeds off money laundering elements of the dark web and all the rest of it. So
were they given a lot of since it's, a German tech company, I suspect that they were given a lot of buzz by the media, by politicians.
There's a lot of egg on faces because a lot of German politicians said last we've got a national champion to stand up against Silicon Valley. They got into the DAX index. They displaced Commerzbank. And so they came from nowhere in 10 or 15 years. And it's all based on basically a complete lie.
Wow.
And I suppose we have to be slightly careful because there are going to be endless court cases going on. But I'm not saying anything that hasn't been said in the documentary. But yeah, well worth a watch. So that's the
perfect.
So that's the up-to-date one. And then I thought I'd keep my reputation for finding odd things on the bookshelf to look at. And this one sprung to mind, and it's called Rogue Mail, and it's by a gentleman called Geoffrey Household, kind of an unusual name. It was written in 1939, and this is a Penguin reissue. It's not a 1939 edition.
Perfect.
It is from the 1970s, so I bought it a long time ago. But it's a very good story. It's a fictional sort of spy story of what happens when a guy attempts to assassinate Hitler and it goes wrong. And this book was written in 1939, it wasn't written after the war. And I see just by chance when I was looking up to check my details on the author and everything, that there's a film coming out about it with Benedict Cumberbatch. So
perfect.
I don't know exactly when it comes out, but it's one of these rip-roaring goodies versus baddies and spies and everything. And if they film it well, it should be a very good story. So there we are, Rogue Mail. You can get it as a book. There have been film versions in the past, but I guess we wait to see how Mr. Cumberbatch deals with it. That's me.
I love it. Yeah, I'm reading here there was a film in 1941. But good to see Benjamin
There's a BBC version in 1976, which is quite a good one, which I think must be what prompted me to buy that book, the one I've just been waving around. Probably saw it on telly and then thought I'd buy the book.
It's good to see Benjamin coming back, still getting work.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough out there for some of these guys.
He's actually a brilliant actor.
Yeah,
he played Dominic Cummings in one of my favorite movies.
Oh yeah, when he punches the ceiling.
Yeah, exactly. All right, I've got. Well, I'll tell you what I'm. What am I watching? I'm excited for this documentary. It's going to come out on October 11th. It's called 38 at the Garden. It is about Jeremy Lin, who was a basketball player for the New York Knickerbockers and New York Nets. What's interesting about, Jeremy Lin. What's interesting about Jeremy, he's Asian American, and there's obviously not a lot of Asian players in the NBA. But he just caught the fascination of New York City to the point where they named it Linsanity. And, he wrestled with this. He's a smart kid, went to Harvard, pro basketball player, but HBO does some really great work around sports, and it crosses not only obviously athletics, but also the culture. And I don't know, I'm excited for that. And HBO, man, I don't know, they continue to do good stuff. I mean, it's one of the greatest media companies out there. Anyways, so I'm excited for that. That comes out October 11th. I dug into the bookshelf myself. 2 books to recommend. Super Forecasting, the art and science.
I know that
producing. Yeah, this one's from, I think it came out in 2015, 2014. It's a few years old, but predictions, how do they come about? My biggest thing, as I learned, is that basically it comes from people who aren't really deemed experts in their field, right? But they're highly technical, highly skilled, and highly observant. They're experts in their skill, but maybe they haven't risen. They don't have the fancy contracts. They're not getting interviewed by the BBC. They're not getting interviewed by the New York Times. But I don't know. It's an interesting book, easy to read. And then this book here, Magic and Loss. The Internet is Art.
Whoa, wow. Now, what's all this about?
I know
the author. I don't know her, but I know of the author. So it sounds.
Yeah, this is from Virginia Heffernan. She's actually spoke to a Brigadoon event in Utah back in 2017.
Right.
This talks about first off, she has a PhD in English from Harvard. I mean, her use of the English language is otherworldly. It is absolutely masterful. I think just for her combination of words, I'm just blown away. I mean, not even the topics, the stuff she writes. She's doing stuff now for Wired and other publications. She has a Substack, but she really just talks about kind of the beauty of the internet. How you can connect, make friendships, learn stuff. So much of the reporting of the internet is scary and terrible, and there's a lot of dark stuff happening, but there's a lot of positives. And she talks about it from the magic of the early days, late 80s, early 90s. And it's a good book.
So it's
a fun read.
It's recommended.
I would recommend it. It's a good read. And I'm a big fan of Virginia. She's a good friend. And like I said, I don't know how many PhDs from Harvard but I'm just literally when I read her stuff, I'm just like, how did she figure out? I'm in awe of the way she uses words.
Right.
So just from a reading exposition.
So it'll be
it's a good read.
Well written. It'll be well written.
Yeah.
So
some good things come out of Harvard every now and then.
Right. So if we depressed everybody after our little break, and now we're back on our 2 weekly run, I think, going forward.
You're spot on about the world. This is a very interesting, serious time. Big egos, big players. I mean, when you have the president of the United States saying we're at a situation that is as serious as the Cuban Missile Crisis, it's pretty sobering.
I mean, I was very small, so I can't claim to have known the atmosphere then. But it doesn't feel like the Cuban Missile Crisis, does it? Or are we missing something here?
Well, getting back to what I said about World War II, and so much of it's just amazing how much impact culture, Hollywood has on the way it shapes your understanding of the world. Famously, all the robots perceived in movies out of Hollywood are scary, they're going to take over, kill you.
Yeah.
Whereas people in Japan use robots every day and they have no problems. But like, it's the cultural shift of like how you are taught or learn about the world, how it shapes your thinking. And that's been really resonant to me. Right. I mean, I can't imagine to me, I'm like in shock. The president said it's Armageddon, Cuban Missile Crisis. And nobody's like, my mom hasn't called me and said, "Are you ready?" Like, there's no like, should I be stocking my pantry? No, you're spot on. I mean, I would think if the president said something like that, and there's been no, to my knowledge, up until this point, there's been no other readout from the White House. Like, oh, he was joking. It was just, it's just guy talk. I mean, it seems pretty serious, but
it should do. But the atmosphere doesn't feel that. Well, let's hope he's wrong, and we do this again in 2 weeks' time, I suppose.
Well, I know. Should we do a daily pod? I mean, is it the Cuban Missile Crisis in the sense of like the drama behind it? Are there, I don't know, or should, as a normal citizen, does it matter? Should we not know about it? And if the bomb hasn't gone off today, I live for another day.
Well, as I say, we're keeping up the positive vibe of things, aren't we? So there we are. Our great ambition is to make it to tomorrow. So there we are.
It does seem a little cavalier. I don't know. I just feel like, are we demanding too much from our politicians? I mean, I don't know. I can't believe the president used that word and there's been no follow-up. I don't know. Be interesting. The White House, actually, Biden today is going to do a press event, I think in Maryland or Pennsylvania. And the press secretary is going to gaggle on Air Force One. She's going to speak to the reporters there. So I don't know. We'll see what comes out of that. But seems like pretty heavy language for the president to be using.
Well, I hope to see you in 2 weeks' time.
I was like, should I be doing my chores this weekend? Does it matter? I mean, should I, does it, if the world is ending, I don't know. Should I be reading more books? I don't know. Should I even watch Wirecard if the world is ending? All right. I still haven't heard anything. I don't know if, Gerald, have you heard from RA Italia?
No, we haven't heard from Italians, and
our agent is horrible.
It's just not working. And
do we need better representation?
And we're behind Meghan and Harry because we don't have our own fact-checking department yet. We need one of those. That number
can be fact-checked. I mean, $18 million for fact-checking?
Yeah, I think that's all confused in the reporting somewhere. Because if it is that number, I may be available to.
Was it U.S. dollars? I know. What currency was that?
Yeah, but isn't that the whole cost of the package of the podcast? Or I think we can reassure our viewers and listeners that we are running on a more modest budget.
There's absolutely no fact checking, I can tell you, in this podcast. I've probably said, I know for sure, I've said 18 things that are incorrect. So
yeah, I mean it's buyer beware as far as we're concerned.
100%.
Yeah, exactly.
Not an investment advice podcast.
Exactly.
By the way, before we go, can we talk about Kim Kardashian and the SEC?
No, I have. Oh yeah, no.
I mean,
yeah, but
I hope I think we would welcome attention from the SEC. It would help our podcast if the SEC find us.
It would, in the time-honored phrase, it would help our profile.
Yeah.
It may not help our careers, but it would help our profile.
So if there's any regulatory agency out there that wants to speak to us, we're available.
Yeah, we listen.
We're available for the RII and any other, 3-letter agency.
We're basically just available, is what we're saying.
All right, Gerald, have a good weekend. Hopefully I'll see you in 2 weeks.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Ciao.